My name is Bill Ayers. I'm in Chicago, Illinois, and I'm talking about a book that I finished recently called When Freedom is the Question, Abolition is the Answer. And it's a set of essays reflecting on collective freedom. Um, in some ways, what I think is important about the book is it's a book that honors contradiction. That is to say, we live in a time that sometimes can feel like the worst of times. A proxy war in Asia, uh, a, a, a Cold War in Asia, really, and a proxy war in Europe, a genocidal war in the Middle East, and the sense that police killings are going on, the environment is collapsing, and we can be pretty despairing about that. There are other times when we look at the world and we say, these are the best of times. Women are resisting being put back into the Middle Ages. The forces for peace are gathering and growing. The movement to save the planet and save the idea that it should be a living planet, good for all, is growing and growing. So sometimes I feel like Dickens would understand us perfectly. The time of darkness, the time of light, a time of enlightenment, a time of ignorance. And that's because we live in contradiction. And I think contradiction is the universal experience of humanity. So rather than run from contradiction, I dive into contradiction. And I think that's important. The book I wrote is really about thinking about freedom in a couple of different ways. Not the freedom that we kind of feel so glorious about individual freedom, but really the idea that freedom is a paradox, that actually we are never more free than when we identify unfreedom and move against it, arm in arm with other people. So it's not the freedom of individual rights that I'm writing about so much, it's the freedom that we all should be free to breathe the air, to live in the world, to experience joy and to experience justice. And that's kind of the one of the major themes of the book. But I go through many things, and one of the topics that I think you would be most interested in is a chapter called Teach Freedom. And I teach freedom and study abolition. I think what the reason the title says when freedom is the question, abolition is the answer, is because I think of abolition not as an erasure or as taking something away. I think of abolition fundamentally as world building. So if you imagine people in 1845 sitting around the south side of Chicago, maybe 20 people discussing abolishing freedom, imagine that. And they're saying, we're going to leaflet, we're going to picket, we're going to knock on doors, we're going to get involved in electoral politics, we'll have a bit of a clandestine movement to help people who are escaping from freedom. But it's 1845. And in order to imagine abolition, they have to think, well, what kind of a world would we build in order for slavery to be unthinkable? And that's what I think today's abolitionists have to do. In 1845, that little group of abolitionists could not have imagined that in 20 years, slavery would be gone. Slavery was intricate. It was right in the middle of every institution of society. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is freedom? How do we get free? And what would it look like if we built a world where self-care, mutual aid was the norm and not the exception, where we didn't need police to be safe, where we didn't need to lock up 2.2 million of our fellow citizens and think that that's the road to public safety? What kind of a world do we need to build in order to abolish the institutions that are oppressive and cruel and unnecessary? I think when we talk about education, it's important to remember that every educational system in the world maps onto the social system that's there. So in a theocracy, whatever else is taught in the schools is practiced in the larger society. Faithful obedience to God's representatives would be central. And the same is true of every other system. You think about, fascist Germany or fascist Italy. And while they taught many things, they had world-class scientists, world-class scholars, artists, but they also taught obedience and conformity. That was central to everything else they were teaching. So what you want to ask yourself is institutions in a free society, even a society with aspirations toward freedom, would follow a path with a distinct set of values designed particularly for free people. So initiative and courage would be applauded, imagination and creativity nourished, non-conformity and non-compliance respected, ingenuity and enterprise nurtured, dissent and disagreement encouraged. So these are the kinds of values that I think we need to imagine ourselves foregrounding in a free society and fighting for, even as we struggle to make the union more perfect.